auto completion now comes in by default, so it's very much an update.
Yeah, so we're going to do SF, if I can type it, env. Oh, I'm not getting auto completion love.
No.
I think it's env create here, but I'm just going to hit env, and it'll tell me I can create here. So we'll do create, and it's going to ask me, that's going to be create compute. That's not what I want.
No, that would be a function, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, it's generate project. Hey, there we go.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put us in the right directory here. I'm going to put us in source, and I'm going to make dir. I'm going to create recruiting for good, and I'll do SF generate. Oh, enter, and I can generate a project. And I'm going to give it a name. I know it's just -n name. This is going to be recruiting for good. Recruiting for good. Okay. All right, and it created a bunch of files for us. Let me open those files there. Do you want to give us sort of an overview and preview of what those files are for?
All right. So what we're looking at is the default project template. This is coming up from a repository that it's part of the CLI tooling package, and you have a number of files and folders which are standard Salesforce DX project. In those files and folders, you'll have the Force app folder, which is probably the most important one if you're going to work on a Salesforce project. You'll see several subfolders that are mapped to the different metadata types. In particular, there's going to be classes for Apex, there's going to be Lightning Web Components, or LWC, and other folders. By default, all of this is empty. We've just created the basic template structures. You can clear those folders out if you want. You don't need to keep them, but it's a good start. It's a good placeholder. Now, also the Force app main folder is something that you can rename if you want. You can have also multiple top-level folders, and that is actually described in the SFDX project file, the JSON file. That's the last file on the root folder. Now, what we want to do also when we create
project file.
SFDC, sorry, what is it? Oh, yeah.
Is that the file you're talking about? SFDX-project?
Okay. DX, yes. Yeah. So this is what gives you a list of your package directories. If you happen to rename your Force app folder, if you want to add other folders, you'll list them here as package directories. Now, the name is a bit misleading because it could be something that you're not planning to package, but this is the way it works. Okay. So now each time we will invoke a command to create a new Apex file, for example, they will land under Force app.
Okay, that's cool. If you people who were tuned in here just saw this error. We can't query your org. Make sure that you're, let me make that bigger. You're connected to this org and have permissions to view the objects and fields. That happens whenever you open a project, a Salesforce project in Visual Studio Code that isn't linked to a Scratch org or to a Sandbox org of some kind. So now that we have this here, we could actually link it too. We could create a Scratch org.
Yeah. And just before you do that, you can also check the status of your project by looking at the lower bar on the left side. You'll see no default org connected at the left, on the left. Yep. There. So you'll see that it's not connected to an org. If you already have an org, you can click on this and tie an org to your project. But maybe you want to.
You'll see I have a lot of expired ones in here. I should clean those out. Let's go ahead and just tie this to an org just for grins and giggles. I'm going to make it good for 30 days. And, Salesforce CLI is not installed. That's exciting.
Well, I guess we have to revert to the original CLI command if it's not.
Let's see.
Working.
I have the original installed. Force org create.
Yeah.
-f. We'll call this one. I love my terminal history. We'll call this one recruiting for good.
So -S is to save it as the default org for this particular project. -F is to indicate where the config file lies for this particular the default setting hiding there, and D is for duration. Remember that Scratch orgs expire. 30 days is the maximum duration for a Scratch org, and you generally end up regenerating new one more often. And finally, -A is for the alias, the name that you can refer to for the Scratch org.
Now, I forget, have we set this up to default so that we don't have to do the -F? Will it automatically look for config/project?
I don't think so. I think you have to write it each time.
Okay. Well, we've got it created there, and you can see that down here in the little bar at the bottom, it says recruiting for good now, because we've created that org. The command line is awfully handy.
And
so
another hint, I have another hint, which is
go for it.
Super valuable. If you click on the folder icon just next to the org name on the bottom, you can open directly the Scratch org or the org that you're currently running on.
Really?
This is super handy.
Well, now it says it failed to run.
Oh.
It's probably going to tell me that it doesn't have the CLI is not installed again. Okay. I'm not entirely sure what's up with that. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with me installing the unified CLI, and it may not. I may need to update some things. Apologize for that, but you can use Visual Studio Code to open that. For now, we're going to use the CLI so that we can keep moving with things. And again, just a quick reminder, we're building a recruiting app. Today we're getting started with our project. So we're going to be creating the project, which we've just done. We're going to go through and talk a little bit about what sort of these files are that come with the default project. And you'll notice that some of these start with a period. Those are hidden files on the file system. So if I were to do an ls down here, you'd see that you don't see a .eslint file, but we do see it listed over here, or an ESLint ignore. What is this ESLint ignore?
So ESLint ignore is coming up from the node project configuration that's tied to our project. Maybe we want to start with that. There are a number of node dependencies that we're going to use to work with our project that deals with code quality. We're basically doing a number of tasks with those dependencies. We're going to do formatting with something called preacher. We're going to do linting, which is basically static code analysis with ESLint. And we're going to do testing with Jest, which is a plugin that will let us test Lightning Web Components if we ever have to write Lightning Web Components. These are the main ones.
Just,
there are other
forward-looking statement. We're going to be writing some LWC.
All right. So we'll need to use those scripts. Yeah.
We get the package JSON file, and that's a node dependency file. That's sort of like a Python environment file or a Ruby gems gem file. This says, here are our dependencies. These are node packages we need, and then kind of unlike an environment file or a gem file, this also lets us define some scripts that we can run at various times in our environment. How do we go about getting these dependencies installed? And I know this is a trick question. I'm going to warn you here, because there's kind of two ways to do it, and I don't know that there's a big difference in terms of which tool you use. Do you have a favorite?
No, so it's a good question, because there are historically two ways to install those dependencies. These are basically called packages, and you have to use a package manager. When you install Node, you get the default package manager, which is npm Node Package Manager. And you can also use another alternative, which is called Yarn, but you have to install it separately. I tend to not use Yarn myself, because nowadays they're very aligned. At some point, historically, Yarn was adding feature. That's why they kind of forked away from npm, which was the default. But nowadays, it's very similar, so you can just use npm.
Now, all right, so if we're going to use npm, sorry, go ahead.
You can. No, I just want to say one last thing about the Node project. We're indeed using a Node project descriptor here, but we're not writing any Node application. We're only using Node for the scripting capabilities. And Node is very powerful for that, because you can use it to script a lot of tasks in a OS independent way using JavaScript. So instead of having a lot of bash or other format shell scripts, you can use basically JavaScript and leverage those plugins to run some automation here deployment, and we'll also use that for CI later on.
So just as a summation and sort of brass tacks practicality, by using these scripts here, it doesn't matter whether on Windows or Linux or Mac OS, we can still run npm run prettier, and it will, in an OS independent way, run the prettier formatting tool for us. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How do we actually go about installing these? Because I noticed that I don't have a Node Node packages folder in my project.
Absolutely. Yep. So you have to use the command npm install to get those dependencies, retrieve them from the central package manager registry, central package registry. And this will download all sorts of files and place them into the Node modules project. Now, an important thing that you have to remember is generally when you're creating a new project, don't add the Node modules project to your source control system, because it's quite heavy and it's generally not needed. Every developer will have to reinstall their own dependencies.
So with that package, with this default that we just created with the SF package, we're getting it could not find the prettier plugin Apex.
Yeah, that's a known bug at the moment. There's a little problem with the default template. You want to change the last 2.1 here to a 0.
Give that a save. And we'll run install again. Oh, Philippe, did we lose you? I think we lost Philippe. Sadness. Okay, so that ran. Hey, well, I'm hearing ghostly sounds from Philippe. Maybe we have him. Okay. Well, if he comes back, when he comes back here, we'll bring him back up to date with what we've done. There you are. Hey,
I can hear you. I think I'm back. Yep.
Okay, great.
For some reason, my network dropped. Okay.
Gnomes. Or Smurfs. We can, blame the gnomes or Smurfs. So I've run the npm install command. You'll get some nice pretty output at the end of it. And you'll see that it installed 935 packages. Lots of little packages in the Node ecosystem, and I've got a Node modules over here. Now, the great thing about doing Salesforce development in Visual Studio Code is, even though we're going to use some of these Node packages, we don't really ever have to interact with the Node modules folder. So, like Philippe was saying when he started to cut out, you don't want to commit this folder to your Git repository. You want to specifically exclude that. And you can see that we've defaulted that. If we open up the .git ignore file, you'll see that we're going to ignore the Node modules folder, which is really powerful. And speaking of Git, shouldn't we create a repository for this?
I think it's a good time to do that.
Yeah, so I'm going to clear this here, and then I'm going to do git init. Now, you could do this with a command line tool or with this bit here, but you could do it with the initialize repository, but I really like the command line tool. So I'm just going to do git init, and it'll tell me that it's an empty repository, and that's all I have to do. There's no command line options there, just git init, enter, and we're done. But we don't have a repository for this anywhere. So let's go ahead and go do that. I'm going to log into GitHub here. And it occurs to me, actually, we were talking earlier today, and Philippe's like, should I create the repository? And I was like, no, we're going to do it live. But I may not be able to do it live, and we're not set up for you to share your screen. So we may need you.
You know what? Do it on your local account, and we can transfer it later, maybe.
That's a good call. So I'll do, under my own account here, I'm going to do recruiting for good. Let's make sure that recruiting for good. Okay, I spelled that right.
Better double check.
Yeah. Spelling, not for me. I'm going to not add any of this information here yet. We'll add that later. I'm just going to create a bare repository. set it to be public. And the thing I love about GitHub's user interface is as soon as I have created this, it's going to give me the commands that I need in order to initialize my repository on my end. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say git add. I'm going to give it the directory. And you'll see that over here, these all changed from U, which means untracked, to A, which means added. And I'm going to give it a source control message. I'm going to give it a commit message of initial commit. Hit that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this.
Repository on your local.
I'm sorry, what?
I was saying this is still on your local project. Huh? This is not yet on the remote repository.
Yep.
And generally, when you already have the project locally, you want to look at the second set of instructions.
Gotcha.
Not the first set, the second set. Yeah.
Yep. These. I'm going to switch the branch to main.
You want to add the remote. Okay.
Oh, that's right. I need to add the remote first. Remote add.
Don't skip instructions. You'll get
don't skip instructions.
You forgot to copy git.
Boom. Okay, so we've added that, and then I'm going to switch the branch to main.
Copy the git part.
Apparently, copying the git part is hard.
Yeah. So adding the remote gives a reference to a remote repository which is hosted by GitHub, because you could develop with Git on your local machine only, but that's kind of missing the point for collaboration. And then you're creating a branch. I think you were already on the main branch on your local project, so maybe the second instruction wasn't needed. But the last one is important. This is where you push your local branch to the remote server on GitHub. So this way, now we look at the web UI and we do a refresh, we should be able to see your default product structure there. Yep, here we go.
Complete with my commit message. It says an initial commit.
Yep.
And a sort of a boilerplate basic README. We'll go in and we'll fill in the README information later. But now that we've installed our node packages, we've created our project, we've created the Git repository, and we've pushed an initial commit of our basic project structure to our remote repository. Where do these Git npm scripts come into play, and what do they do?
All right, so there are a number of them, and generally, as you develop, you want to make sure that your code is correctly formatted. This is especially important if you're working as a team. So the first one you generally tend to use is Preacher, just to reformat your code correctly. And to run any of those scripts that are listed in there, you can just do npm run, then the name of the script. So for example, you could run npm run Preacher. Now, Preacher is configured to run on a number of file formats. It will run on the Apex files, but also JavaScript, CSS, etc. There's a whole set of extensions that are covered. And you can apply different rules depending on the format. And this is described in the .preacher.rc file, I think. Yeah, here it is.
Yep.
And you see that there's a default one that is shared. Preacher, just like ESLint, work with a core module and a set of plugins. And for Lightning Web Components, we have special plugins like the LWC parser that you can see here on line 6, which will handle it specifically. And for other like non-common files like the Aura files, the CMP page, etc., we're using a standard HTML parser. Preacher wouldn't know how to handle those because these are special extensions that are defined by
special file types. Now I notice there's nothing in here about Apex classes.
Yes, that's because Apex is a bit different. Apex is set up in a different plugin, and that was the plugin that actually caused some issues when we were setting up the project. We haven't configured anything specific, and the plugin, which is called Preacher Plugin Apex, will automatically detect the right file names, and so there's no need for an extra configuration here.
And now, to give you some idea of what this does, I just want to illustrate it here real quick. So I'm going to create a Apex class, and I'm going to do example Apex test. Just put it in the directory here, and you see we've got this all set up here. Now I've sort of formatted this with all on one line, and if I were to save this, you'll see that Prettier will come in and automatically reformat it for me. Now it's giving me this weird weird red stripe here. Now this is showing up because by default the Prettier RC is using 2 spaces for.
Yeah, it's not showing up here, but
is it not? It may just be a little hard to see. Now, one of the things that I like to do to keep these up to date is I like to go to GitHub in the Trailhead Apps Apex Recipes folder, Apex Recipes app, and pull the Prettier RC file here, and you'll see that it's got a few extra lines. And I'm just going to copy this and put this in place for my Prettier RC. And I just like to make sure everything matches. So I'll save that. And now you'll see that my tab width is set to 4. And if I go over here and I save this again, it bumps it out to 4, and I don't have that red stripe there. So Prettier is a really powerful tool for formatting your code.
And I want to call out something also. The reason why your code is updating live in the editor here is also because you have a VS Code extension. It's not just the Node project that we have. You also have an extension added.
That's a good call.
Otherwise, if you just use the CLI, it will just work when you run the script, and it will not show visually errors on the code.
So that rings time for a shameless plug here, and I'm going to show you CodeFriar's pack. I'm going to search for that in the extensions, and well, I would have expected it to be CodeFriar. Okay, here we go. CodeFriar's pack. Oh, it has an apostrophe. And this is a plugin pack that I created, published for you. You can install this, and it will give you everything you have here, including I'm going to pretend that I can find this quickly, including Prettier, the code formatting one for you. So you get all the same tools that I use on the live streams. You'll get to see all of those. You can just install them, and you're up and running just like the environments I use. So we've talked about Prettier and the NPM scripts. I've got this example test here. We can use that here in a little bit. But when we talk about setting up our project, one of the things that is good to get going from the very beginning of a project is some documentation requirements. And one of the ones that I like to use, and I use in Apex Recipes, and I'm just going to show off Apex Recipes package JSON here, is the dependency for Apex docs. And I'm just going to copy pasta that directly into our dev dependencies.
Or you can also install it with the command line. Maybe it's something even better with an npm install command.
Npm install. I'm going to do it globally because I use this one in all my Apex docs. You're giving me a funny look. Do you not think that's appropriate?
I tend to avoid that just to handle versions manually.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
But I mean, it can work. It's just that you're gonna have a harder time keeping track of which version you're using when it's not listed in the project itself. Especially if someone else installs your project and wants to use it, they're gonna have a
That's a good point.
And you want to save it also as, and you want to add an extra flag so that it's installed as a development dependency, not just as a regular dependencies. Yeah.
Is it a capital D?
Or is --save -dev? I don't remember what's the short code.
Okay, we'll do save dev.
This one.
Okay.
And
now it's important to note that this is the full name.
Yep.
So you got to get that in there. And then one of the things that I like to do is set it up so that whenever I go to commit, my docs are regenerated. So we use a tool called Husky, which is a NPM plugin, to go ahead and run lint staged, which is another plugin that is going to do certain things for us whenever we go to commit. One of the things that it does is run this prettier dash write. So we're not gonna do it on camera here. We got too much to do. But what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna bring in the way that we created the Apex docs script,
NPM
so that when it runs that when we go to pre-commit. So I'll pull that in later, but that's just sort of a thing you can look forward to in looking at the repository. So we've got our package set up. We've got our package file set up. We've got our project set up, and we've created the GitHub repo. Now we need to talk about sort of the big impressive portion of what we want to talk about today, and that is CI, or continuous integration. Continuous integration is a massive topic. There are many ways to solve CI, just to accomplish the goals of CI. I'll put it that way. I don't want to say solve the problem of CI, but there are many ways to accomplish the goals of CI, many tools to do that. We're only going to deal with one of them, and that's the tooling that we use for all of our sample apps. So anything under the Trailhead Apps GitHub organization, we use GitHub Actions. And Philippe, as it turns out, is sort of a black belt ninja when it comes to GitHub Actions. And so he's going to sort of talk to us about what GitHub Actions are and why you might want to use them, what kinds of things they can do for your project. And then we're going to set this project up to use GitHub Actions so that we see those benefits automatically.
Yep. And yeah, as Kevin pointed out, GitHub Actions are a really great tool. And what I like the most about GitHub Action is that everything that you have to configure for your CI environment and workflow, find a project that you like, you can more or less copy the workflow configuration and apply it to your own projects. Just like if you like, for example, the configuration that is being used for one of our sample apps, like Apex recipes, you can just copy paste it an experiment from it. So rather than starting a whole new configuration from scratch, we could leverage one of those templates. Now, the way this works for GitHub Actions is that everything is placed into a .github folder at the root of your project. And there are a number of configuration files in there, not just CI. What we want to look at for now is the workflows folder. This is really what is working for GitHub Actions. Now, each GitHub Action workflow is a YAML file, and you can see there are a number of those there. You probably don't want to use all of them, but we can start with something very simple. We can take, for example, the CI-PR YAML file. Not maybe, or CI, yeah, whatever.
It helps if I click on the right one. No, I'm going to the PR one. I just clicked on the wrong thing.
So just to clarify what these do, what is important to look at to understand the workflow is to look at the top of the workflow and look at the triggers. And there's on keyword on line 5, which describes when this work.
Oh, we haven't. I think we may have lost you again, Philippe. Now, for those of you who are wondering why we may be having some networking difficulties, Philippe lives in absolutely gorgeous part of France. And he's back. Maybe. As I was saying, he lives in an absolutely gorgeous part of France in the mountains.
Yeah.
And his internet he's kind of remote. So you're back, it seems. I was just telling everyone that you live in a beautiful mountainous region of France.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time with my network today. I could hear what you were saying. I guess I got cut. So the next thing we want to look at is the trigger, the pull request, and this means that the workflow will happen when there's a new pull request, and you can see there are different types of events around pull requests. It can be when a new pull request is open, edited, synchronized, etc. And there's some specific rules for specific branch. Synchronize is, I think, when you I think.
Okay.
But all of that is documented, so you'll have to look at the documentation on GitHub for triggers.
Now I want to draw
Now,
a special
I don't think
note
we need to
to
comment.
line 6
Yeah.
here. Line 6 is workflow dispatch. That means if you have workflow dispatch in there as a triggering event, it means that you get a button that you can push in the UI to trigger this workflow, which is super useful, especially as you're testing this. Nobody wants to be, making white space changes and committing it just to see the PR kick off. So I enjoy having the workflow dispatch in there.
It's
Sorry, I didn't
fairly
mean to
new,
interrupt
so
you.
even if you're... No, that's good. It's a very good call out. And it's fairly new. I think it's like happened in the last 6 months or so. So yeah,
Yeah.
very great time saver for testing.
We got some people tuning in from all over the world while we wait for Philippe's network to catch up here. Good to see you from Paris and India. Chris up in Canada. Chris, I'm curious, is it snowing already? It's definitely sweater weather here in Indiana, but maybe it's snowing already there in Canada. While we wait for Philippe's network to catch up, I just want to talk a little bit about the sort of philosophy behind CI, what it does. Continuous integration is this idea that you've got some automation, some tooling that is able to look at when code changes and do certain actions for you automatically. So you might think about this as like a workflow. And these YAML files that we're defining here, they define the workflow that happens when a particular trigger is triggering event occurs. So on the workflow dispatch, so when somebody pushes the button, or when a pull request is opened, edited, synchronized, or reopened, that's when the contents of this particular workflow job will run. And the things that the sort of canonical example for what a continuous integration system does is that it takes your incoming pull requests and it runs unit tests against them. And this becomes immediately useful and really powerful to catch when you have sort of issues when you've changed something underlying, or perhaps another team has changed something in a third-party piece of code. When you turn around to go and merge your pull request, you want to be able to know whether or not your test still passed to make sure that nothing else is broken. You can also do other things with continuous integration systems, and you can get as fancy as starting to do things like making sure that your code coverage hasn't decreased or that it has increased. You can do all sorts of things with your code repository. I mean, I'm having a hard time phrasing this because really the sky is the limit when it comes to what you can do with continuous integration. But the canonical example is to run your unit tests and to provide you information about the unit test coverage of your code. So when we look at what this PR is doing, and Philippe, way to rejoin us there with your network, we were just talking about what CI is used for most often.
Yes. I don't know if you caught my explanation about the structure. I was talking about jobs. Maybe I got cut before.
Yeah, you got cut before that.
Okay. So I was explaining that the way the CI workflow file is described is first you have the triggers and then you have the series of jobs. Think about jobs as a folder of a group of tasks, and under those jobs we have the steps or the GitHub actions.
Wow, the internet. I don't know. The internet gnomes are really pounding on the network today.
If an action fails.
Go ahead.
I was saying if one of the action fails, the job fails, and normally the CI build is failing. But you can have several that. You can have actions that always happen, or actions that will that can fail safely. Now we have split our workflows into multiple jobs. We could have a single job that does everything, but we have split our workflow into two jobs, mainly because there are two types of checks that we're running. we're running some actions with the node project, and we're also running actions with the Scratch org. So the first job will run everything that relies on the local file system, and the second job will do everything that is related to your Salesforce org. That's the basic structure. So formatting, linting, and lining web components test uses Node. That's the first job. And the second job is called Scratch org tests, and really needs the Salesforce CLI and a Scratch org so that it deploys your metadata and run everything on the remote Salesforce org. That's really the basics of the way this project is structured. What we can do now maybe is grab this file and take a look and try to run it in local project maybe.
And I'm just going to do that locally because I have Apex recipes checked out already. So I'm going to do GitHub, and I'm going to put it in the current directory. Oh, I need to do it recursively. Okay. So now, if we open up the files
and
over
you
here,
you took everything, right? Okay.
I did take everything, but I'm planning on getting rid of
there are a couple of things that we don't need, like the code owners, the templates. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm gonna pull code owners and all of these out for right now. And so what we have is our workflows directory, and we have our CIPR, which is the one we were just looking at. Now we have it in our project.
Yeah.
Now, do we have to do anything to activate actions inside our repository?
Yes, we do. So there's one thing that we need to do in order to be able to run those workflows is that we'll need a secret. Some of these tasks require a secret, like an authentication token, in order to connect to our developer hub, which lets us spin our Scratch orgs. And to run the workflow, there is a secret that we need to set up. So Kevin is looking at his repository configuration. In the secrets folder, we have two options. We can either create repository secrets or environment secrets. We'll take the first one.
We're going to use
repository secret. Yeah, repository secret is good. Okay. We can do it at the repository level, or we could do it at the org level or environment level. For the name of the token, you want to look at the exact name that is specified in the workflow file. You can copy paste it. It's going to be in the second job, so nearly at the middle of the file. And you can see later on there's a below. It's calling a copying
secret for the dev hub
file. Yep. And it's taking dev hub sfdx URL. Now this is the part where you want to hide your screen because you don't want people to look at. You can show the command, however, before we do that.
Okay.
So the command to generate that is sfdx force org display. And you want to add a, I think it's a -v, so that it's a verbose mode. And I think it's it's -u and the alias of your developer hub. So be careful, it's a lowercase u, by the way.
Oh, so this is my developer hub.
It's not the alias of the Scratch org, it's the alias of the developer hub.
Okay, well I have another window here that you can't see, and I'll go to my project here, and it's all done.
So essentially what you'll get as an output is a bit of a JSON structure, and there will be a URL which I think it starts with sfdx off or something like that, and it's a URL that you need to paste in the secret that is in your GitHub configuration page. And this is a URL that is giving you maybe it's -- verbose. I forgot the name of the flag, but we really need this verbose view because otherwise the authentication URL is not showed up in the default command.
All right, I'm copying that here. Oh,
So what's the prefix for the URL for people trying to do this at home?
Let me get it printed out here. It's force colon //
Yeah.
And I got to copy the whole thing. So it starts with force and goes through the .com on the end, and then let me just drag this off the screen, and I'll put that in place.
So make sure you don't share the secret. It must remain a secret.
Okay, let me drag it back. There we go. So I've added the secret, and you can't see it, but it's there.
Yeah.
And at the magic of secrets.
Yeah. At this point, also note that even yourself as admin won't be able to see it again. If you click on update, you can only provide a new value. It's the value is hidden forever, but you can always regain it, figure it out by typing the CLI command again. So that's the only secret that we need. We probably should remove some of the workflows, because some of the workflows are using our secrets for more advanced stuff like packaging and some bot interactions. We probably don't need that.
Yeah, and we have CodeCov set up on that
workflows
stuff.
are going to look for this basic. There's no secret for CodeCov. It's because it's a public repository. It will work out of the box. What you can remove, however, is maybe the packaging part and
the trigger packaging one.
That's not something we're going to. Yep, and also the packaging workflow, which is being after. Yep.
Yeah. I'm just gonna pull the packaging. And packaging.
So you'll notice that there is a CI workflow and a CI PR workflow, and the difference between those two things is that CI will run on the main branch whenever there's a pull request that is being merged, and CI-PR is actually running on the PR itself. So that's an important difference. CI-PR will run when contributors try to bring something to your product, and CI runs once the PR has been merged. So it's a two-step process.
Okay, so CI/PR makes sure that what you've committed, test pass, that sort of stuff, and then CI runs when you try to merge that down to main. So if your merge fails or test pass after your merge fail, that's going to show up in CI.yaml, not in CI-PR.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. And we have a third one also that we use for sample apps. It's the CI/PR pre-release, which is basically the same thing as CI/PR, but it runs on a pre-release environment. So just before the release is happening, the Salesforce release, we have a temporary environment which is running on the pre-release.
I like it. I got rid of the pre-release one. That's not really going to apply to this repository. Cool. So when we look at our
so we still have a
CI/PR, I just want to highlight some of the things that they're doing by calling out these lines that are sort of our comment lines. People think about CI as being a wonderful magical tool, and the results of CI can be wonderful and magical. But what CI is doing is actually just automating a bunch of stuff that you would normally have to do, like authenticate to your dev hub, create a Scratch org, deploy your code to the Scratch org, run your unit tests in your Scratch org. All these things are just happening automatically for you in the CI environment rather than you having to do them. So when you think about what kinds of things you want to automate in your CI, think of the stuff you're doing all the time, right? You're running your unit tests, you're branching and merging. These are things that you want to have it look at and put in place for you to automate. Now, there's some other things in here that this does that are above and beyond that. Like it's going to upload our code coverage results to CodeCov, which is a public app that shows you the coverage results for your unit tests. And it'll tell you, oh, like if you merge this to main, your unit test coverage is going to go up or it's going to go down, so on and so forth. So that's sort of nice to have, but the core competency of CI, again, is to run those unit tests to make sure that what you want to merge to main is good to go. And also, when you do merge it to main, that everything is going to work before actually merging it.
Absolutely. It maintains the quality of your code and also makes sure also the formatting is also enforced, so that even if you have a team of people developing with different code styles, everything will be unified thanks to Prettier, for example. That's also very handy.
Yeah. Now, thinking about that Prettier formatting stuff, if we wanted to add in some other sort of code quality type things, one of the tools in the Apex ecosystem is a tool called PMD, and Salesforce has sort of wrapped that in the security scanner plugin for the SFDX. But if we wanted to execute one of those before we, just on the checkout, before we even try to run the unit tests, we would put that in this first one, right? We would put this in the...
Absolutely. It doesn't require a Salesforce org. It will run locally, so we can run it there.
Okay. So I'm thinking maybe what we want to do, and maybe not for our sample apps, but for this, what I want to do, I think, is to say format lint LWC tests. And I want to say CI actions outside of a Salesforce org.
You can rename it for sure. If you rename it, you'll just have to be careful just to rename it also in the dependency for the other job, because the other job will only start once this one is completed. So there's a dependency on this first job.
This job runs outside of a Salesforce org.
And in fact, everything that is in this job relies on a node project. If you were to use PMD, you could even create a third job on its own, because it wouldn't require a node project. I think it would make more sense. Because what happens between the jobs is that you essentially lose context. So it's like your virtual machine, which is running all those jobs, gets wiped out. And unless you pass certain parameters from jobs to jobs, everything is restarting from scratch. And this is why you'll notice that on each of these jobs, we're checking out our source code. The source code has to be checked for each of these jobs. It's not being kept in between. And I think since there's no dependency with Node, or no dependencies with PMD, it would make sense to have a third job, actually a second job in the middle, and push the scratchboard test as a third job.
So we've got the actions checkout here.
Yep.
But I don't actually see actions checkout.
It is happening after we install the CLI. It's a bit later on. We don't need...
Yeah, check out the source code. Yep, there it is. Okay. Yep. So one of the things we could do, just sort of as a prototype here, we could come back all the way out here and we could give it a name. We could say PMD.
Yep, you can add another job there.
And then it runs on...
I would just copy paste it just to avoid any typos. Because YAML files are quite sensitive, especially to things like white space. If you misplace a space in an error, it will crash. So,
but Philippe, I never make typos.
No, sure.
And so we could define our steps, and step 1 could be something like name checkout source code. Checkout.
You know what? Maybe before modifying this, we should actually try it first. How about that?
Oh, where's your sense of adventure? Okay, well,
I know. I know.
I'll add that later. Let's in order to put these in place, what we need to do is add them to our repository. So what I'm going to do is
still a few workflows that you can remove, right?
I thought I got rid of all of them. Let's double check. Well, we probably don't need auto-assign. So the auto-assign is a nice feature of GitHub that'll allow you to automatically assign an issue that somebody's created to a user.
It's a custom action that actually I wrote. It's not even a GitHub feature.
Really? I didn't know you wrote that. That's pretty cool.
And then we've got these two.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's a custom action, because what is so cool about GitHub Actions is that you can write your own. It's essentially, you can call a node project that will run as one of the actions that you can list in the CI job. And it's very helpful. So I have this one that does the auto assignment for issues, but We also have another one. It's not being used, I think, in Apex recipes, but there's another one which will update a README file to update a link to an install package, to a package install link whenever you do a packaging run. Things
We
like
are
that, which are very handy.
we are using that. I removed it earlier.
Oh, okay.
While you were describing something else. So these are the files that we've modified with the M or are brand new, have a U. So our CI YAML, our CI-PR YAML, and our example test classes, I'm going to add those because I don't want them to be untracked. And then for our modified, our prettier RC, our jest config, and our package JSON, I'm going to add those. I'm going to add commit message. I want my prettier RC. Why isn't that? There we go. Okay, there we go. Updated prettier RC and CI workflows. And save that. Now we've got some comments coming in. Samir wrote, we do have I'm assuming he means huge problem with code formatting, but he wrote, we have a hug problem with code formatting, and that makes me smile. One of the things that so let me be perfectly honest with you. Prettier makes some choices for formatting code that drive me up the wall. The number one being, it seems to think that all code lines should stop at 80 characters. And I don't know about you, but I have a very wide monitor that's not very tall. So I would prefer my code lines to be, 120 or 200 lines long, but Prettier, as a standard for things, chops them all off at 80 lines. But I've come to learn to love the Prettier because it means that I can easily look at code from, say, somebody else on my team like Philippe, and I know exactly what certain formatting things mean. I know that when it's putting my parameters on different lines and the way it does things. And so, Samir, use Prettier. If I can impress upon you one thing, please use Prettier. And Prettier does work well for Apex. You'll notice that we've got a node module here in the package JSON called Prettier plugin Apex. And once you've installed that, when you run Prettier will pick up your Apex files and format them as well. And I think it does a great job aside from that whole line length thing.
And I want to give a shout out to a community member called Dangmai, who is the owner of this plugin. It's no simple feat to build this Prettier plugin. So say hi and say thanks to him. And also, if you find issues or have suggestions about rules that should be added for Apex formatter, let him know. There's a GitHub project for that.
That's great. The other question we had is, how do you deal with pipelines when you have different packages? I think that's actually an interesting question. Because you could just have different jobs in the CI ones, right?
Exactly. So a good example of that is the automation components project and the Easy Spaces sample apps. These are two different sample apps and they have different configurations. They are both multi-package, but they have different structures. For example, Easy Spaces has some dependencies between packages. So in its packaging structure, it will run packages one after each other with some conditions that will let us essentially package certain packages or skip certain packages. So the workflow is a bit more complicated, but you can see there are some if statements which will basically check if a package needs to be repackaged, upgraded or not. So this is it's quite complex. It requires a bit of time to set up because you have to understand what are the dependencies between your packages, but it's also quite powerful because it's a real-time saver. Packaging is something that takes a lot of time, so you don't want to be there behind your monitor looking at it all the time. You want CI to take care of it for you. And so Easy Spaces, 4 packages, and some of them have dependencies between each other. And then the other example is automation components. They're like, I think it's 8 packages, but they are independent. And For automation components, we have a different approach. Because these packages are independent, we're using something called a matrix, and we run packaging in parallel. To save a bit of time, we are packaging multiple packages in parallel. And you can see here at the top of the file, there's a strategy part. It's right on top.
Yeah.
Strategy. And it will run the same job with parameters. And so you can package 3 different packages at the same time with a parameter. That's a different approach. So you do parallel processing, goes much faster, and yep. But that's really advanced stuff. So I don't know.
Hell awaits. That's a great nickname. And I saw that you're from Chile. That's really cool. But Hell awaits. If you missed it, I want to draw your attention to the packaging YAML for Easy Spaces LWC and for automation components, because both of those show you 2 different ways of handling multiple packages from the same repository. And so those are like go-to look at examples. If you've got questions, I'm sure the 2 of us would be able to, or would be willing to field them. I can't promise we'll have answers, but if we don't have answers, we'll at least give you a funny comment. How's that for a trade-off here? Now, with that, we've got 2 minutes left, and I want to do 2 things in those 2 minutes. I want to give you a promo for what we're doing next week. Next week, we're going to be having a recruiting specialist on to talk to us a little bit about, what kinds of things does a recruiting app need to do in order to be successful. So we're going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of things. It needs to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and how we go about doing those things is a later conversation, but we need some idea of the scope of what our project has to do. And so you'll notice that we're sort of flipping back and forth between sort of philosophy, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then how we're doing it, with today being a how to do things when we set up our project today. Next week, we're going to be back towards the philosophy end of things a little bit, and then we'll be back again with another actually like building something here the week after that. So thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We had a whirlwind tour here today, and there is more on CI, etc. In a number of videos, and I'll post some of those in the comments for this video on YouTube afterwards. And again, feel free to reach out. My username is, let me give it to you on the screen here. It's @CodeFryer, and Philippe's is @Philippe Oziel, and I at least am happy to field any kind of great questions you have. But yeah, with that, let us see you all next week, and thank you for tuning in. Oh wait, you want to say something? Go for it.
Yes, thanks. No, just thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, good deal. Talk to you next week.